Welcome to Shuffle Source. I'm your host Brandon, and today we will be upgrading the Doom Prevails Commander Precon deck from Marvel Superheroes. As always, we're working with a budget of around $100 or less, where we will be adding 10 cards and cutting 10 cards to make this deck stronger without breaking the bank. Then, near the end of the video, we'll cover a few no-budget options for anyone looking to take this deck further. Let's get into it. The commander we will be discussing today is Dr. Doom, King of Latveria. For 1 blue, black, red, we have a 3/3 legendary creature human noble villain that says whenever you discard one or more land cards, each opponent loses 2 life. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target villain you control gains menace until end of turn. It connives. And as a reminder of what conniving does, draw a card, then discard a card. If you discarded a non-land card, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. So at first glance, you might think this is primarily a villain typal deck. However, the real theme is discard matters. Now don't get me wrong, the deck does contain plenty of villains, and Doom even rewards them by giving one of them menace and having it connive each combat. But if your goal is to build around the villain typal specifically, I actually think the backup commander, Loki the Deceiver, does a better job for supporting that strategy. Dr. Doom's first ability says that whenever you discard one or more land cards, each opponent loses 2 life. It's important to note that this only triggers once per discard event, no matter how many lands you discard at the same time. So if you discard 2 land cards at the same time, your opponent still will only lose 2 life. So ideally you want to try to discard those land cards each in individual discard instances. At the beginning of combat on our turns, Doom is going to give one of our villains menace and have it connive. That means we will draw a card and then discard a card, and if we discard a non-land card, that creature is going to get a +1/+1 counter. So our commander offers us a reliable discard outlet every single turn, while also helping us filter through our deck. One of the neat dynamics with this commander is deciding what to discard. Discarding a land card drains the table, while discarding a non-land card grows our creatures through connive. Because of that, we want a deck that can take advantage of both options and make every discard meaningful. As we upgrade the deck, we're going to lean much harder into discard synergies, outlets, and payoffs that reward us for discarding cards. We'll still keep a solid villain package to enable Doom's combat trigger, but our primary focus is maximizing the value from our discard engine rather than simply playing every villain we find. A special thanks to all of our channel members. Your support truly means a lot and we greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to show your support and get access to some exclusive perks, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. You can also support the channel by liking, subscribing, and dropping a comment. Thank you, and now let's get back to the video. We've now made it to the first of our additions, and we're going to kick it off with Archfiend of Ifnir for 3 colors and 2 black. We have a 5/4 creature demon with flying. Whenever you cycle or discard another card, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature your opponent's control. You can also cycle it for 2, discard a card, and draw a card. So Archfiend of Ifnir is a great addition for any discard focused deck because it turns every discard into a potential board wipe. Whenever we cycle or discard another card, we get to put a -1/-1 counter on each creature our opponents control. Those counters are not until end of turn, they stay on the board. We have a lot of ways to discard in this deck, including with Doom's connive ability. With Archfiend on the battlefield, those routine discard effects can really start shrinking down our opponent's creatures, which can quickly pick off utility creatures or even wipe out token strategies completely. It also does have cycling on it, so if you really wanted to discard it and draw a card, you could, but most of the time we are really wanting to put this onto the battlefield. And here we have our next addition. We have Cool But Rude. For 1 in a red, you can go to level 2. Whenever you discard a card, this class deals 2 damage to each opponent. And for another 1 in a red, you can go to level 3. When this class becomes level 3, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, shuffle, then discard a card at random. So this is another solid addition because it gives us another discard outlet, another discard payoff, and a late game tutor all in one package. Right away, it's going to give us another repeatable looting effect by letting us discard a card whenever we attack and then draw a card. Now, once we reach level 2, the card even becomes more impressive. Now, every time we discard a card, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. Pair that with Dr. Doom's ability, and then suddenly discarding a land card doesn't just drain the table for 2 life, it also deals an additional 2 damage to each opponent. That's 4 damage to every opponent for every single discarded land. And even if we're discarding non-land cards, we're still getting rewarded with damage while filtering through our deck and growing our conniving villains. And if the game happens to go long, level 3 gives us even more value by tutoring for any card that we need. While we do have to discard a card at random afterwards, it's still never bad to have another tutor at our disposal. And Next we have Counterspell. For 2 blue, we have an instant that says counter target spell. So Counterspell is one of the cleanest upgrades you can make to this deck because sometimes the best answer is simply telling your opponent no. For just 2 blue mana, we can counter any spell with no restrictions or conditions attached. We can often save our commander, protect our board, or even stop an opponent from their win condition. If you have access to blue in a deck, you want to always include a counter spell of some kind. And here we have Green Goblin Nemesis. For 2 a black and a red, we have a 3/3 legendary creature goblin human villain that has flying. Whenever you discard a non-land card, put a +1/+1 counter on target goblin you control. Whenever you discard a land card, create a tapped treasure token. So Green Goblin Nemesis is a great addition because it is a discard payoff that rewards us no matter what we discard. If we discard a land card, we create a tapped treasure token. That's especially nice because those extra lands in our hand are no longer just fuel for Dr. Doom's life drain, they also become ramp, helping us cast bigger spells or double spelling in future turns. If we discard a non-land card instead, Green Goblin puts a +1/+1 counter on a goblin we control, and conveniently Green Goblin is a goblin himself, so even if he's the only goblin on the battlefield, he can keep growing into a legitimate threat, especially with him having evasion. I also like that this card is a villain, meaning it's a natural target for Dr. Doom's combat trigger. Giving it menace and letting it connive each turn makes it even easier to generate discard value while building up its power. And next we have a new card from the set, Leader Super Genius. For 2 and 2 blue. We have a 1/3 legendary creature, Gamma Scientist Villain. If a creature you control would connive, instead you draw a card, then that creature connives. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control connives. So Leader Super Genius is one of the best additions you can make to this deck because it's effectively doubling up on Dr. Doom's connive ability and giving us some card advantage. At the beginning of combat, Leader is going to allow one of our creatures to connive, and if a creature we control does connive, he actually has us draw a card first before it connives. In other words, every time we connive, we're effectively drawing an extra card before the normal draw discard happens. The extra card selection is huge because it gives us more opportunities to find lands when we want to drain the table, or non-lands when we want to grow our board. Between both Dr. Doom and Leader on the board, we can generate an incredible amount of card filtering and discard value over the course of a game. And here we have another new card. We have Loki, Lord of Misrule. For 3 and a blue. We have a 3/4 legendary creature god sorcerer villain that has pay a blue, tap it, choose target creature you control. Each creature you control other than the chosen creature becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn, except it isn't legendary, activate only as a sorcery. So this is a really fun addition because it gives us the ability to turn our entire board into copies of our best creature. Now, while that is powerful in a lot of situations, it becomes especially exciting in a deck built around Dr. Doom. Imagine we have a board full of random villains and tokens, then we activate Loki, targeting a creature with an incredible static ability or a payoff. Suddenly, every other creature we control becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn, letting us generate an explosive amount of value or present a lethal attack out of nowhere. While Loki doesn't directly have anything to do with our discard strategy, he can really be an amazing, unique late game payoff. Imagine having a board filled with Dr. Dooms and then you discard a land card. And here's our next addition, Monument to Endurance. For 3 colorless, we have an artifact that says whenever you discard a card, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. You can draw a card, create a treasure token, or each opponent loses 3 life. Now, Monument to Endurance is such an incredible discard payoff. Dr. Doom wants us to be discarding cards every turn through connive and other effects, and Monument just makes it to where we're consistently getting rewarded for it. The flexibility here is really what pushes this card over the top. Every turn we can convert our discard into an extra card, a treasure token, or 3 damage to each opponent depending on what the game calls for. Need to keep the engine going? Draw a card. Need to ramp? Make a treasure. Ready to close out the game? Start draining the table. It even gets better when we discard a land. Dr. Doom will trigger and make each opponent lose 2 life, and Monument can pile on another 3 damage to each opponent if we choose that mode. That means 5 damage to every opponent for a single discarded land. And here's our next addition, Norman Osborn. For 1 and a blue, we have a 1/1 legendary creature human scientist villain that has Norman Osborn can't be blocked. Whenever Norman Osborn deals combat damage to a player, he connives. You can also pay 1 blue, black, red, and you can transform Norman Osborn, activate only as a sorcery. When he transforms, you flip the card over and he becomes Green Goblin. Now, Norman Osborn is a fantastic addition because both sides of the card naturally support Dr. Doom's game plan. On the front side, he's an unblockable villain that connives whenever he deals combat damage to a player, giving us another repeatable way to draw and discard cards. The more often we connive, the more opportunities we have to discard land cards for Doctor Doom's drain effects, or to discard non-land cards to fuel our other synergies. And because Norman is unblockable, it is very easy to keep that engine running turn after turn. Now, on the Green Goblin side, he reduces the cost of spells we cast from our graveyard and gives every non-land card we discard that turn Mayhem, allowing us to cast it from the graveyard. That means pitching a spell to connive no longer feels like losing a resource, it often just becomes another card we can cast later that turn. I also love how this factors in the decision making when it comes to what to discard, because if we discard a land card, we can drain the table with Doctor Doom. If we discard a non-land card, we can cast it right back from the graveyard, assuming we're on the Green Goblin side. It's also important to note that if you want to cast it on its Green Goblin side, you can just pay that mana cost instead of playing Norman Osborn first. And next of our additions is Psychic Frog. For 1 blue and a black, we have a 1/2 creature frog. Whenever Psychic Frog deals damage to a player or planeswalker, draw a card. You can also discard a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Psychic Frog, and you can exile 3 cards from your graveyard. Psychic Frog gains flying until end of turn. So Psychic Frog is another great addition because it gives us another repeatable discard outlet while also providing us consistent card advantage. Every time it connects in combat, we get to draw a card, helping keep our hand full and ensuring we always have options for our discard engine. Now, the activated ability here is really where this card shines. At any time, we can discard a card to put a +1/+1 counter on Psychic Frog. That means we're no longer limited to like having to wait for a connive trigger, for example, to discard. We can just discard a land or anything we want at any time. The final ability can also be surprisingly relevant. Exiling 3 cards from our graveyard to give Psychic Frog flying can help it connect for even more card draw. And lastly, I want to note another reason why it's important that you can discard a card at any time is because this way we can really maximize cards like Monument to Endurance, where you can only choose each mode once on each turn. This allows us to trigger this on our opponent's turns very easy. And now we've made it to the final addition. We have Reanimate for 1 black. It is a sorcery that says, put target creature card from your graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. You lose life equal to its mana value. Now, Reanimate is one of the most efficient recursion spells ever printed. For just a single black mana, we can bring back any creature from any graveyard directly onto the battlefield. That flexibility is huge. We can reanimate one of our own powerful threats that we discarded earlier, or we can steal the best creature from an opponent's graveyard if they have something better. This is also very useful considering our game plan revolves around discarding a lot of cards. Sometimes we will happily discard an expensive or powerful creature to any of our discard abilities like Connive, and then we'll just spend 1 mana later to bring that creature right back to the battlefield. Yes, we do lose some life equal to the creature's mana value, but in Commander that's almost always a trade I'm willing to make for this level of efficiency. Paying a few life to cheat in a huge threat into play is often game changing. We've now made it to the removals portion of the video, and we are going to kick off our first removal with Abomination World Ravager. For 7 in a red, we have a 10/10 legendary creature Gamma Berserker villain that has Menace and Trample, and it also has Mayhem for 4 colorless in a red, which allows you to cast the card from your graveyard for that cost if you discarded it this turn. Now, this card does have some nice synergy with the deck since it has Mayhem and can be cast from the graveyard if we happen to discard it, but I ultimately think it's a bit too expensive for what it offers. Even with Mayhem reducing the cost, we're still looking at paying 5 mana for a creature that doesn't immediately impact the board beyond it being a large attacker. In most games, I'd rather spend the mana advancing our discard engine or deploying multiple smaller villains that have a lot of synergies with our plan. Next on the chopping block, we have Damocles Base, Sword of Kang. For 4 and a black, we have a 5/5 legendary artifact vehicle that has flying death touch. Whenever Damocles Base deals combat damage to a player, that player faces a villainous choice. They sacrifice a non-token creature of their choice, or they lose 2 life and you draw 2 cards, and it also has a crew cost of 3. So this is a cool card, but it is a bit too clunky, I feel, for this deck. 5 mana is already a significant investment, and on top of that, we have to crew it to attack before it starts generating value. Even when it connects, the opponent gets to choose the outcome. Most of the time, they'll simply pick whichever option is going to be the least painful for them, making the effect much less reliable than it first appears. More importantly, the card doesn't really tie into Doctor Doom's core game plan. It doesn't help us discard cards, it doesn't reward us for discarding, and it doesn't make our connive engine any better. It's just a generically solid value value threat. And here's our next removal. We have Endless Ranks of Hydra for 3 colorless and a black. We have a sorcery that says, for each opponent, you create a 2/1 black villain creature token with menace. Whenever your commander enters or attacks, you may pay 1 and a black. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is a flavorful card, but I think it's ultimately a little too low impact for what you pay. For 4 mana, we're only creating 1/2/1 villain token per opponent. So one of the biggest themes of these upgrades is shifting the focus away from generic villain typal cards and instead maximizing Dr. Doom's discard engine. We'd much rather have cards that reward us for conniving, discarding lands, or turning those discards into card advantage, damage, or ramp. And here we have Extract Power for 5 colorless and a blue. We have a sorcery that says, look at the top card of each player's library, then exile those cards face down. You may play them without paying their mana cost for as long as they remained exiled. So I'm not a big fan of this card. For 6 mana, we're investing a lot into an effect that depends heavily on what happens to be sitting on the top of everyone's library. Sometimes you'll hit something amazing, but other times you'll just spend 6 mana and get very little in return. I also really don't like cards that have me depend on what my opponents have in their deck, unless that's the game plan of the commander I'm playing. For 6 mana, I want my spells to be game changing and directly support whatever my commander is doing. And here we have Helmet Zemo Mastermind for 2 colorless and a blue. We have a 2/2 legendary creature human noble villain. Whenever Helmet Zemo attacks, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with mana value less than or equal to his power from your graveyard. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. If you cast a spell this way, put a +1/+1 counter on Helmet Zemo. So this is actually an okay card, but it really fits in another deck. His attack trigger lets us cast instant or sorceries from the graveyard, which can be powerful, but it pushes the decks towards a spellslinger strategy, and that's not really what this deck's built on. On top of that, Zemo has to attack before he really does anything. That means we have to make it around an entire turn cycle, get him into combat, and then also have worthwhile targets in the graveyard. Again, I'm not saying this is a bad card, it just really needs to go into a different deck. And next up, we have Claw Master of Sound for 2 and a black. We have a 3/3 legendary creature elemental rogue villain that has Death Touch. Whenever you play a card from exile, Claw gains indestructible until end of turn. When Claw deals combat damage to a player, look at the top card of that player's library, then exile it face down. You may play it for as long as it remains exiled. Mana of any type can be spent to cast a spell this way. So for me, Claw is one of the easier cuts because it doesn't synergize at all with what our commander is trying to do. The card is built around stealing and casting cards from exile, which is a completely different game plan than the discard strategy that we're trying to maximize. It's also important to note that Claw has to connect in combat before we can exile a card from our opponent's library, and then we still need that card to be something worth casting. That's a lot of hoops to jump through for a very uncertain payoff. Our next removal is Lady Loki, Agent of Chaos. For 5 and a red, we have a 5/5 legendary creature god sorcerer villain that says whenever you cast your first instant, sorcery, or villain spell each turn, exile it. Then exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. Lady Loki deals damage to each opponent equal to the difference between that spell's mana value and the non-land card's mana value. Lady Loki deals damage to each opponent equal to the difference between that spell's mana value and the non-land card's mana value. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. So Lady Loki, Agent of Chaos, is a flashy card with a very high ceiling. However, it's just too inconsistent and mana intensive for what we're trying to do with Dr. Doom. At 6 mana, I want my cards to reliably advance my game plan, and Lady Loki often depends on luck to generate meaningful value. Now, the effect is certainly powerful when it works, but it is tied to exiling cards from the top of our library and hoping you hit something impactful. Sometimes you'll get a huge spell for free, and other times you'll reveal something relatively small and make you feel like you really didn't get your mana's worth with Lady Loki. I really feel like this card would be much better if it was built as a commander for its own deck. And our next removal is Skull Clamp. For 1 colorless, we have an artifact equipment that says equipped creature gets +1, -1. Whenever equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards, and it also has an equip cost of 1. So Skull Clamp is an incredible draw engine for decks that can take advantage of it. However, this is not the best deck for it. The card is at its best in decks that have a consistent way of producing disposable 1/1 tokens or other 1 toughness creatures, and we don't have a lot of that going on. It's an absolutely powerful draw engine, but only in the right deck. And here's our next removal, Superior Foes of Spider-Man. For 2 colors and a red, we have a 3/3 creature human rogue villain that has trample. Whenever you cast a spell with mana value 4 or greater, you may exile the top card of your library. If you do, you may play that card until you exile another card with this creature. So this is a cool card, but I do feel like it was one of the easier cuts because it just doesn't line up with what Doctor Doom is trying to accomplish. The payoff is tied to casting spells with mana value 4 or greater, which we can do, but it's not something that we're really focused on with this deck. Even when it does trigger, the reward is simply exiling the top card of our library and letting us play it later. Now that's a fine ability, but it's fairly slow and doesn't interact with our commander's discard engine in any meaningful way. And we've now made it to the last of our removals. We have Siphon Mind for 3 colors and a black. We have a sorcery that says each other player discards a card. You draw a card for each card discarded this way. I really feel like Siphon Mind is a little underwhelming in this build because it only makes our opponents discard cards and not us. Our commander specifically wants us to discard cards so we can drain the table and trigger all of our discard payoffs. Siphon Mind doesn't help with that at all. It simply generates generic card advantage for us. We also have Doctor Doom providing a connive trigger every combat, along with several new additions that let us loot, discard, and draw cards more consistently. Because of that, I don't really think we need a 4-mana sorcery whose main job is just to refill our hand. Hey everyone, I wanted to take a moment to give a huge shout out to our partner, the Mighty Meeple. If you're in or visiting the Concord, North Carolina area, the Mighty Meeple is the local game store to check out. Their team is friendly, knowledgeable, and always ready to help you find exactly what you need. From magic and board games to minis and more, whatever your hobby, they've got you covered. And even if you're not local, no problem. You can shop for Magic singles and other TCGs at mightymeeple.com. Use promo code SHUFFLE for 5% off your order. Thank you. And now let's get back to the video. And we've now made it to the no budget options portion of the video, and we are going to kick it off with Crucible of Worlds. For 3 colorless, we have an artifact that says you may play lands from your graveyard. So Crucible of Worlds is an amazing card to add to this deck because it takes a lot of the tension out of Doctor Doom's discard decisions. We want to discard lands to trigger our commander and drain the table, but at the same time, we need to make sure we can keep hitting our land drops. Without a card like Crucible of Worlds, that can really become a delicate balancing act. Do you pitch the land for immediate value, or do you hold on to it because you might need to play it later next turn? Crucible really fixes that problem by letting us play lands directly from our graveyard. Now those lands we discarded for value aren't gone forever. They can become future land drops for us to the point where we will never miss a land drop going forward. And here we have our next no budget option. We have Deadly Rollick. For 3 colors and a black, we have an instant that says if you control a commander, you may cast the spell without paying its mana cost, exile target creature. So Deadly Rollick is an outstanding removal card. Exiling any creature at instant speed without spending any mana is an incredible rate. I also really like that it exiles instead of destroys. In Commander, so many decks rely on graveyard recursion or death triggers, and Deadly Rollick cleanly answers those threats without giving opponents a chance to reuse them. And since we plan on keeping Doctor Doom in play as much as possible, this card will frequently cost 0 mana, making it one of the most efficient interaction spells we'll have in the deck. I also feel like this deck could use some additional removal, so I feel like Deadly Rollick would be a great fit. And here we have the last of our no budget options. We have Vampiric Tutor. For 1 black, we have an instant that says search your library for a card, then shuffle, and put that card on top, you lose 2 life. So Vampiric Tutor is one of the best tutors ever printed, and it's an easy inclusion in this deck because it gives us access to whatever piece we need for the current situation. For just 1 black mana at instant speed, we can search our library for any card and put it on top, setting up our next card draw. The flexibility this offers is incredibly valuable. If we need a discard payoff, a recursion piece, interaction, or a way to close out the game, Vampiric Tutor can go find it. Losing 2 life is barely a downside in Commander, especially considering the massive increase in consistency that we will get from this card. And there you have it. After upgrading this deck, we have a final upgrade cost of $70.32. This total does not include the no budget options that we covered. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to click that like and subscribe as it really helps out the channel. Let me know what you think about the Doom Prevails Precon. What other commanders are you excited about from this set? Let me know in the comments. And as always, until next time, thank you for watching.